Your brain has never seen the world as it actually is. That's not hyperbole, it's literally how perception works. Your brain doesn't wait for information to arrive and then form an opinion. It predicts what's coming first, and then it filters everything it sees through that prediction. Which means every design review you've ever run, every usability session you've ever conducted, every piece of feedback you've ever received, all of it got filtered before you even decided what to think about it. And that filter was built from whatever you already believed. The scary part isn't that we see what we want to see. It's that we don't even realize that we're doing it. So if you've ever walked out of a research session confident you'd found the answer, or watched the teammate's work get dismissed before it even had a fair shot, stick around because today we're getting into the expectation bias and why your brain is already one step ahead of the evidence and what you can actually do about it. What's up, UX fam? Welcome to another edition of the Cognition Catalog, where every week or so, we'll dig into a new cognitive bias and explore how that bias can impact how our team works together and what we can do to ensure we don't get caught up in the pitfalls. Because working with people is hard, and the more insights we have into the human condition make it just a little bit easier. To learn more about the expectation bias, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com. Sign up for the newsletter to get a new bias in your inbox every week, and make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And if you think you're getting something out of the show, well, I would appreciate if you left a 5-star review. That would really help me out so much more than you could possibly imagine. Shout out to this week's sponsor, CaseOwl. Stop second-guessing your case studies and presentations. CaseOwl uses AI to score your clarity, your narrative strength, and align with best practices. Then it gives you specific fixes, not just vague advice. Try it for free at caseowl.com or use my code BeyondUX for 50% off. That's CaseOwl with 2 O's.com. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And for more information how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them. Picture this. You've been working on a feature for months now. You know it inside and out. You've thought through all the edge cases. You've iterated on all the flows. You've walked through 2 rounds of internal reviews, and you're confident that it's the right decision. So you run some usability studies, 5 participants, hour each. They go pretty well. A couple hesitations here and there, but people seem to figure it out. Nobody hates it. It's always good. You write up the findings, you flag a few minor pain points, and the team agrees, we're good to ship. So you ship it. And then something starts to feel off. Support tickets start to trickle in, engagement seems lower than expected, and then a customer success call surfaces a pattern that you didn't see coming. Users aren't doing the thing that you designed for. They're working around it. So you go back and you watch the session recordings, and there it is. The hesitation that you logged as minor, that moment where a participant paused for 5 full seconds before clicking. The comment that you noted as positive, that listening again sounds a little bit more like polite confusion than genuine confidence. That signal was there. You just didn't register it because you walked in expecting the feature to work, and so it did. Right up until it didn't. That's the expectation bias. And the reason it's so hard to catch isn't that we're careless, it's that our expectations feel distinguishable from good judgment until they don't. So what exactly is the expectation bias? Well, we tend to perceive the world through the lens of what we already expect to find. Before we've evaluated a single piece of evidence, our brain has already generated a prediction, and that prediction quietly shapes what registers as signal, what gets explained away, and what we walk away believing that we saw. Now, here's something most people don't realize about how our brains work. It isn't a camera. It doesn't passively record what's right in front of it and then form an opinion. It does something more like the opposite. The brain is constantly generating predictions about what it's about to experience. When reality matches the prediction, the signal gets dampened and it's treated as expected or unremarkable. When reality doesn't match the prediction, you get what neuroscientists call a prediction error. It's a signal that something worth paying attention to just happened. This architecture is genuinely useful. It's why you don't have to consciously process every detail of a familiar room. The brain has a model, and if that model is accurate, cognitive resources get freed up for things that actually need attention. The trouble starts when the predictions are wrong and the brain doesn't flag it. The formal research on this started back in the early 1960s with psychologist Robert Rosenthal, and he studied something pretty mundane: lab rats navigating through a maze. He told one group of student researchers that their rats were genetically superior at finding their way through the maze, and the other group he told that theirs were not. Now, the rats were identical, but the results were not. The students who expected better performance got better performance, not because the rats were any different, but because the students were different. Their expectations had quietly changed how they handled, how they coached, and how they observed their animals. That finding sent Rosenthal in a direction that would shape his entire career. He partnered with elementary school principal Lenore Jacobson, and they tested whether the same dynamic played out with humans. Now, teachers were told that a new assessment had flagged certain students as more likely to make significant academic gains in the coming year. But the students were randomly chosen. The test was completely fictional. However, the students that Jacobson and Rosenthal flagged improved more than their peers over the following year, and with the strongest effect showing in the youngest kids. And the expectation had become the outcome. Rosenthal and Jacobson published their findings as Pygmalion in the Classroom in 1968, and it's named after the myth of a sculptor whose belief in his creation was so complete that the Greek gods made it come to life. Now, the parallel was intentional. What we believe about someone can genuinely make it true. What's really intriguing is what Rosenthal demonstrated in his labs we can observe in teams every single day. Before we get into it, it's worth calling something out. Expectation bias, it's often discussed alongside confirmation bias, and the two are related, but they are not the same. Confirmation bias describes what you go looking for. Expectation bias describes what you notice when the evidence is already in front of you. But together, they form a tight loop. You expect something, then you notice what matches, and then you ignore what doesn't, and then your expectation gets reinforced. Repeat, repeat, repeat. The reason this matters for teams specifically is that most team processes, we tend to assume a certain level of perceptual neutrality or objectivity. We tend to assume that when we review research or evaluate a design or assess a project's progress, we're working from a shared reality. But we're often not. We're each working from our own mental model, and that's often shaped by what we expected to find before we even walked into that meeting room. But here's the thing, expectation bias rarely feels like a bias. It feels more like experience. It feels like pattern recognition. It feels like knowing your team or knowing the work or knowing what good looks like. And that's exactly what makes it so hard to catch. By the time it's shaping a decision, it's already been mistaken for judgment. In team dynamics, it often shows up as a label that outlasts its evidence. So once a teammate gets filed away as quote-unquote the strong one, or the one who overcomplicates things, or the one who's still finding their way, that label starts doing the evaluating. A well-regarded engineer's PR might get waved right on through, while a new designer's concepts get interrogated constantly before it even gets considered. The work hasn't changed, but the filter has. It shows up in how work gets reviewed too. A feature that leadership has championed gets a generous interpretation, rough edges get noted and swept under the rug, while a project that's been quietly doubted over time gets scrutinized at every single turn. The teams might present the same quality of progress, the same quality of work, but they get fundamentally different responses, not because the work is any different or any worse, but because the expectations are misaligned. A usability session might get conducted with a mental model of how users will respond, and that mental model shapes what registers as a signal. So a participant's hesitation might barely make it into the notes. A moment of confusion becomes something like, well, they eventually figured it out. The problem isn't that the team is ignoring the evidence, it's that the expectation has already changed what the evidence looked like before anyone decided what to do with it. The goal isn't to second-guess every instinct, though. It's to know when your instincts might be running the show a little bit too early. So here's how to build some of those habits. First, notice when you've already made up your mind before the work begins. One of the clearest signals of expectation bias is when feedback feels like a formality. If you're going into a design review or a code review or a performance conversation and the outcome already feels settled, that's worth pausing on. Because being experienced isn't the same as being objective. Expectations shaped by past patterns can be accurate, and they can also lock in an assumption that deserves to be revisited. So work to build honest pre-work. Ask yourself, what did you expect to see and why before you see anything at all? Next, agree on what you're looking for before you start looking. The clearest way to reduce the influence of expectations on evaluation is to decide early on what good looks like before you see the work. So in usability research or even in job interviews, define what success and failure look like before sessions begin. In design reviews, agree on a specific question that the work needs to answer before it gets presented. The thing to remember here is that you want to give the evaluation something to anchor to other than whoever walked in with the strongest opinion. Next, watch how your read on a person shapes your read on their work. Once you've decided that somebody is strong or weak, that label will tend to follow their output around. So it's important to remember to ask yourself whether you'd evaluate that differently if you didn't know who made it. Next, write your research questions before you write your hypothesis. Now, most teams might do this backwards. They develop a point of view, and then they design research to test it. Now, that sequence almost guarantees that the question will be framed in ways that favor the hypothesis. A more useful habit is to draft research questions first, starting from the genuine curiosity about what you don't know. Then surface the hypothesis. The order matters here because it changes what you're listening for in your sessions. Research designed to explore tends to find things, but research designed to validate tends to confirm things. And then lastly, separate who collects the research from who interprets it. When the people who design the feature are the same people facilitating the usability studies, the expectation bias is baked in from the start. And that's because they're not neutral observers. They're invested in a particular outcome. Building even a small degree of separation between the team doing the work and the team running the research doesn't eliminate the bias, but it gives the research a better shot at telling you something that you didn't expect. Expectation bias doesn't require carelessness or bad intentions to do real damage. It just requires a prediction. And your brain is making those predictions constantly every single day, whether you ask it to or not. The teams that navigate it best aren't the ones who've somehow learned to see without a filter. They're the ones who've built habits that make that filter more visible before it's already decided what the evidence means. Well, all right, y'all, that's it for the Cognition Catalog for today. I hope I helped to shed a little bit of light on the expectation bias and how we can avoid some of those pitfalls at work. I'm curious, have you run into the expectation bias before? What happened? How'd you get through it? I'd love to hear about it. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. To learn more about the expectation bias, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com. Sign up for the newsletter to get a new bias in your inbox every week, and make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And if you think you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you could possibly imagine. And if you want to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some select biases, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/shop. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use a promo code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. And if you have a favorite bias that you want to see in print, let me know. I'd be happy to take requests. Stop second-guessing your case studies and presentations. Case Owl uses AI to score your clarity, your narrative strength, and align with best practices. Then it gives you specific fixes, not just vague advice. Try it for free at caseowl.com or use my code BeyondUX for 50% off. That's caseowl with 2 O's.com. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, Zoe, and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.